I'd like to look at a game played by forum member the Mofro, and he is white in this game, and as you can see, he played f4, the bird's opening, and based on this game and some of his posts in the forum, I think we can tell that he's a fan of the bird's opening, and based on this game, it seems like it's working out very well for him. White developed a nice position and just sort of steamrolled black, who attempted the most aggressive reply against the birds, and that's the From Gambit, which I always believe was a fun way to get a good position against this peculiar opening. But as white will show, black's advantage isn't that clear, or it's hard for black to actually get anything going here, and in this game, black was just left down a pawn for no real compensation. So maybe the Mofro can post a little bit more about the bird's opening and tell us a bit more about it, but this is an interesting introduction. I've never really played it before, but this is standard. This is all theory, and here I think the most common moves are g5, which is sort of the most aggressive follow-up, and knight f6, a little more passive. g5 is what I like the most, if only because black has just gambited a pawn, white doesn't really have any weaknesses, so you need to play something really aggressive, and g5 is a way to sort of pry things open on the king side. But black plays knight h6, a little dubious. I'm not really sure what the intent is. Maybe if, something like d3 or e3, we can come into g4, create some pressure, but I'm not sure about it. g3, and this is what white played, and I think this is the best plan. I was looking at things with e4 or maybe even d4, but g3 is the most logical plan, fianchettoing the bishop and getting ready to castle. So white's played really well so far. Castles, bishop g2, rook e8, and castles. And here I think if we stop to evaluate for a minute, we see that, white is already better, clearly better. White has an extra pawn, doesn't really have any real weaknesses. His development might be a little bit worse, but black doesn't really have any threats. His knight is kind of awkwardly placed. White has two center pawns, black doesn't have any. These pawns are going to be moving quickly into the center, staking out space. Things will be turning very quickly. So already I think white has a much better position here. Knight c6, and in the game white played knight c3, which is a fine move. I think I might have tried d4. I think this is an interesting alternative, just staking out as much space in the center as possible. And now if black tried something like knight g4, sort of keying in on e3, I think actually the right idea would be c4. The reason I suggest this is that I think white wants to play knight c3 in this position to prepare e4. But he also kind of wants to play c3, or at least use this pawn against it. So I think by playing c4 first, we're preparing knight c3 and e4. And now if black plays aggressively with knight e3, we can just capture this. And after knight c3, I think already white has an excellent position. We're going to kick that rook and get an e4. And if not, we're sort of going to steamroll black. Bishop g4, queen d2. And here I think white is much better. Black has very little compensation for the pawn. White's got a much better center. For example, if rook e8, I think maybe, no, too early for e4, but something like rook a d1 should lead to an advantage for white. So I think d4 is an interesting possibility, just getting as much space in the center as possible. But then again, it does create a little bit of weakness on e3. So white played knight c3 straight away, and like I said, my only qualm about this move is that it sort of blocks in the c-pawn. But knight c3 is still a good move. So bishop g4, d3, preparing e4, and that would just with a very solid and better position. Bishop c5, whoops, wrong move. Bishop c5, that really isn't going to lead to anything. King f5, white has a very solid position. Knight f5, strange move, but the knight does have to reposition, although it just allows e4. And now knight fd4, and in analyzing the game, I want to provide lots of alternatives and suggestions for improvements, but really white is just playing logical moves and has a much better position. So not too many criticisms overall. This just shows that if you're going to play gambit as black, you need to play much more aggressively with something like g5. And it also shows that the bird's opening, which a lot of players think is kind of pointless and don't really like to think about, is a legitimate threat and can lead to good positions. So knight fd4, and here I think you could try. White played bishop f4, but I think knight e2 is also a possibility. It looks kind of weird, but the idea is to put the question to this knight right away and maybe prepare c3 and d4. So say knight f3 takes, and this will look very similar to the game, this bishop h3 and then trading. And queen d7, and now even maybe knight back to c3. The only intention was to get the knight out of d4, and maybe knight into d5, queen f3 exploiting this open f-file, maybe even queen h5, followed by development of the bishop, and white has a very solid position. In fact, this missing f-pawn is perfect because it gives white pressure against the black f-pawn. So knight e2 is one possibility, although bishop f4 developing I think might be better. That's what was played in the game. Knight e5, and now bishop takes, rook takes, and I think this is good. When you're white and you're up material, white is not only up a pawn, but he would have a long-term advantage anyways because he's got the two center pawns and more space, so trading pieces is good for white here. And here I think knight d5 would be a good move. It's a good square for the knight, and if c6, just knight f4 followed by c3 and d4 with a huge center sort of steamrolling black I think would be great. So knight d5 with the idea of c3 and d4 I think is a good plan for white. That might be an improvement, although white's move in the game is fine, which was knight a4. Now knight takes, bishop takes, and then as we saw in the other variation, this trade of the bishops again. Black really doesn't want to trade bishops here, maybe doesn't have much of a choice, but every trade brings white closer to a clearly winning ending. So now black has to move the bishop away. The knight comes back to c3. And note how this is fairly similar to the knight e2, knight back to c3 line. Bishop c5, queen f3, pressure against the f-pawn, queen d7, rook a d1, just bolstering the center. I would like at some point for white to get in c3 and d4, but I mean that could have happened eventually, although white just got a winning position in a different way. Rook a to e8. Maybe if I was black, I think the real option is bishop f8. And this keeps black in the game, but white is just much better after d4, rook e6. And now moves like queen f5, maybe queen g4, all sorts of moves, knight e2 even with c3 and e5. It's going to give white a great position, but at least black is still in it. After rook a e8, though, the game is just over after white plays the accurate move d4, winning a piece, because after bishop takes d4 and rook takes d4, the queen cannot recapture, because queen f7 leads to mate, as we can see. So d4 is just winning material. And after rook takes d4, black played queen e6. Now white is obviously up a piece for absolutely nothing with a better position. So, I mean, the rest of the game, it's not really a lot of point going over. We'll just play through it quickly. Important to note that white is trading pieces, maybe now developing some threats. And now just, this is just a massacre. White's up material. Black gets a few checks, but really it's hopeless. Here I think just, I mean this is optimal. Maybe queen e7 would be a little more quick, but rook takes, and then I do like the way after a bunch of checks at the end, white wisely just transposes into the winning king and pawn ending, and black resigns. But the point is that, before move 20, white played excellently, just the way you want to play against a gambit, boldly taking the pawn and then finding out the safest course of development and just getting into a position with no weaknesses but the edge of a pawn. I mean, from here, white has a wonderful position. And I think this shows that black needs to play more aggressively in this opening. If they're going to gambit a pawn, you got to go all out with something like g5. Get ready to exploit the slightly weakened white king side. And my only improvements for white, maybe d4 here instead of knight c3 as in the game. Maybe that. And then a little bit later, maybe instead of bishop f4 here, maybe something like knight e2. And then instead of knight a4, maybe knight d5, followed by knight f4 with ideas of c3 and d4. But overall, a great game by white. It shows that, if black is going to gambit a pawn, he's got to play aggressively. And maybe we could talk about some of the mainline variations of the bird's opening, rather, if the Mofro would be willing to contribute some of his thoughts on the opening, since it seems like he knows a lot about it. If you have any thoughts, feel free to post them in the appropriate thread or in the discussion forum.